LD Comics is a women-led welcoming to all forum run by creators. We champion the graphic novel form, particularly works with an autobiographical voice. Our activity is towards supporting and equipping graphic novelists, especially but not exclusively people identifying as women. Established in 2009 by Sarah Lightman and Nicola Streeton as Ladies Do Comics, today LD Comics is run by a committee of published graphic novelists: Rachel Ball, Emma Burley, Lou Crosby, Wallace Eates and Nicola Streeton. From the start, the core of LDC's activity has been the monthly meetings, hosting presentations from invited guests to a public audience in a welcoming atmosphere for networking and making friends. The introduction of LDC online monthlies aims to replicate the joy and stimulation of our physical meetups. Everyone is welcome.
So first of all, why did I do Macbeth? I have always loved Shakespeare. I've always been a Shakespeare nerd, that flavor of theater nerd. And adapting a play as a comic has a lot of advantages. It can be read and reread at the reader's own pace in their own comfortable environment. But it also has all of the context cues of a live performance. So you get indication of what the characters are thinking and feeling and what actions they're taking. Comics are my favorite medium because they are accessible. The reader engages with them on their own terms and in their own space and at their own pace. And then I set my adaptation in the year 1040, which is the year that the historical King Macbeth came to the throne in Scotland. So I did my best to do the clothing, the buildings, armor, weapons, make them historically accurate, which led me to making the visual style kind of a medieval Northern European style. So sequential art, I love this definition, a literary medium that narrates by arrangement of images and text in an intelligible sequence. Will Eisner from 1985. Sequential art is one of the oldest forms of visual art. Egyptian tomb paintings, if you remember your ancient Roman art history, like Trajan's column, telling a story all the way down it. And even cave paintings, there's a wonderful theory that because they were in complete darkness, there would have been one storyteller holding a light source and moving through the artwork in sequence around the cave. Humans like to tell stories, and sequential art is an amazing way to tell them. And what else could the image on our left be but a comic? This is a medieval illuminated manuscript of the life of King David, brilliantly colored in amazing sort of comic style. And then on your right is an image from my adaptation of sequential art and comics. It's always been a medium to visualize the impossible, and it's what we use it for today. And that's kind of why I love it. So you see all the way on the left is Hildegard von Bingen's illumination of the Queen of Heaven. Next in to the right, you have my adaptation of Macbeth showing Macbeth's turmoil, the visions that he's seeing, the supernatural experience that he's having. Moving over to the right, it's the Holy Lamb of God enthroned in heaven. And then all the way on the right is Lady Macbeth struggling with her inner turmoil and talking about how hell is murky and she can't see anything. I love medieval art because it's very focused on the sublime and the terrible and the world beyond the physical plane and both torment and ecstasy. And in my art, I love to show not just what the actors are doing, but what they're feeling. And I try my best to work that into the visuals around them as they are acting out. So why is one considered high art and the other still struggles for the credit it deserves? I've thought about this a lot. So we have on our left an illuminated manuscript with real gold that was painted on a calf's skin using precious stones ground up for pigment. So of course it's expensive and it's a one of a kind. It's exclusive. It would belong in the library of a powerful, influential person with a lot of resources and be only for that person. And then to our right, I have my Macbeth page inspired by the art on the left. It's accessible. You can read it in the bath. You can leave it on the bus. It's not that big of a deal if you spill your coffee on it. And it's accessible to a wide variety of people, a multitude of people. I've thought a lot about this question of high versus low art. It really angered me a lot. I have a fine art background, where my first degree show were these large scale oil painted landscapes. And then I started my master's as a watercolorist, just making, again, single complicated watercolor paintings. As I transitioned into making comics during my master's, I really had to fight with my professors to get them to see comics as artwork. And I found it really unfair that they would think it was low art or not art enough just because a lot of people have access to it on their own terms. This is my master's thesis. I did end up making a comic. I was first interested in archetypal stories, specifically the hero's journey, and I wanted to explore it from a femme perspective. So comics are where heroes exist today. So I figured I'll make a comic. And I absolutely loved it. It was the first one I'd ever made, and I've kind of never looked back. Comics, again, I keep coming back to this accessibility idea that comics are more accessible than regular, quote unquote, fine art. If you imagine having to go to a museum to see, let's say, a book of illuminated manuscripts, you would have to put on shoes, put on pants, get transportation to the museum, be there at opening hours, stand. Maybe there's not a place to sit for you to actually enjoy the piece of art. You have to look at it behind glass. You're not even able to touch it. Whereas my comics, you could rip pages out and staple them to your walls, and that would be great to me, and I would love it. Also, making comics is just a lot of fun. I hated having to think about archival concerns as a painter. Is my paper acid free? Is this pigment going to last? Are these staples going to rust? If I compile something onto my scanner and get it scanned, then I'm good. And I love that. And there's also no wrong way to make a comic. I can be as weird and nerdy as I want to in my comic creation. Oh, I went too far, sorry. So I also experiment with, I really enjoy artist books. So I have, in my comics career, created these sort of taken a real book. This is an old Time Life Cradle of Civilization book and built new books inside of them. But again, this is a one of a kind thing that has to live carefully on my shelf. I scan that thing in, and now we have the accessible copy, the copy that you can dunk in your bathwater if you want to. Again, I really enjoyed this idea of putting art in as many people's hands as physically possible. And I also love comics because of their long and storied history of being a medium for self-portraiture. All of my books are deeply personal, and probably too deeply personal. When I adapted Macbeth, I tried to zoom out a bit from myself and from my autobio experiences, but I did cast myself as Lady Macbeth because it was a teenage dream that I always wanted to fulfill, to play her. But yeah, Macbeth, it's a bit more universal than my individual experience. But comics are, I've always loved them as a place for self-insertion. It's almost expected that at some point, at one point, a comic creator will insert themselves into their comics narrative. And then the artist then and now, as I was making this book, I was thinking a lot about the people who made the art that I was inspired by, most of them being completely anonymous, which is appealing, to be honest. Working alone in a monastery, getting their housing, their food, and their community provided for them. Honestly, most days that sounds amazing, and I would love that. But yeah, today, like, as you can see, I'm working for page rates or in advance or future sales. Comic artists are known and beloved, but many of them sort of end up penniless. It's definitely a complicated thing. I'm not sure ultimately which way of creating art is better or worse. But I know for certain that a medieval illuminated manuscript creator would never be giving a talk publicly about their work like I'm doing right now. Yeah, and this sort of wrap up. I bounced around a bit, but I hope you enjoyed some examples of my work that I've created, especially in Macbeth, because I'm really proud of it. There's again my QR code where all the places that you can find me online. And yeah, I just hope something nice to think about, the idea of comics as this high art form, even though they're accessible to all the plebs like us. But thank you very much.
Hi everyone, my name's Hayley. So basically 2 years ago yesterday, so yesterday was actually my 2-year anniversary of being diagnosed. So it was May 2022, I was diagnosed with breast cancer at the age of 37. So that was a massive shock, as you might imagine, completely turned my life upside down. I only actually finished active treatment in October, so I'm on various medication for the next decade. I'm doing well now. It was successfully treated, but this has just put my life on a completely different path to the way I was going before. And the reason I called it This Might Surprise You is because everything about my experience has been surprising. So my diagnosis was surprising, what I learned along the way was surprising, where I ended up was surprising. The fact I became a cartoonist was also very surprising. And also, I think when you think of cancer narratives, oh, it sounds a bit depressing and it's grim and dark and scary. And those things are all true, but I think there is a lot more to say about cancer. And as you can see there from my cover image, I hope you can see my approach is slightly different. So here is a piece of art that is based on a panel in my comic, and it's just a way of illustrating how I felt after I was diagnosed. So it says at the top there, beeping machines that made me feel like a widget in a factory, and it's a repeating image of me having chemo, going beep, 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 because those bloody machines just beep all the time. I felt really dehumanized. So I was just living my life normally, a woman in her 30s. I had a successful freelance career, happy family life. My daughter was 3, going along, doing everything I do. Then all of a sudden, I'm a patient, I've got a hospital number, and I felt that the doctors and nurses were seeing me as this poor little cancer patient and this diagnosis, and I was a problem to solve, and I wasn't a full human. At least they were all kind people, but they're also very busy, and I completely understood that they had to prioritize. But I also felt this real frustration that I wanted to show them something about myself. And I didn't really know how to do that. And I should say as well, I've always enjoyed drawing, but I hadn't done anything in this vein for many, many years. I did come to Ladies Do Comics back in maybe 2013, but then my life took me off in different directions. I actually wrote 5 novels, tried to get them all published, had no luck, never mind. But cancer made me into a cartoonist. So how that came about, I found out that my surgeon was going on paternity leave for a couple of weeks. And so I really liked him, but he was definitely very distant. I definitely felt that gulf between doctor and patient, and that really frustrated me. I completely understood why there have to be professional boundaries, but I also wanted to find a way to get through to him. And so I heard he was going away for a couple of weeks because his partner was having a baby. So I had this idea to draw him a card, and this was the first cartoon I'd drawn in several years. And so I just had this idea to draw a card, and so I gave it to him at my next appointment. And this is the card. So you can see there that it's his baby passing him a scalpel as he's about to operate on me. And I was giving him this card because it was a nice thing to do, but I also wanted to say, look, I'm a funny person. I've got a sense of humour, and I'm interesting, and I'm not going to let this cancer sort of take over everything. So yeah, I gave him the card, and he was clearly very touched to receive a card, but he didn't open it in front of me, so I wasn't sure how he was going to react when he actually saw the picture. So here are some panels that sort of tell that story. So there's me and my husband saying, he seemed happy to get it. Yes, but will he still be happy when he opens it? A couple of weeks later, I received a copy of Mr. Campbell's letter to my GP. And there are some medical notes there. Don't worry about reading all that, but I'll just zoom in on one section there. At the end, he wrote, I've thanked her for the delightful card that she has made for me. And that just made me think, oh, that's interesting. I found quite a powerful way of getting through to someone I didn't know I could get through to. And it just made me think about the power of cartoons as a medium. And I continue with my treatments. I had various thoughts bubbling away, although I didn't do any more drawing until Christmas time. Also, I was very ill from chemo. It does take it out of you. And then I had the idea to do a Christmas card, which was like my year in chemo on one page. And then I gave this to family, friends, and medical professionals. And one of the nurses I gave it to, here's an exchange with her. She goes, I love it. It's like, what are those books called? Graphic novels. Yes, like those. I guess so, yeah. And then there's me thinking, well, that's ridiculous. I could never do a graphic novel. And this panel is about 2/3 of the way through my graphic novel, which I kind of like. So that was December 2022. I started my book in January 2023. So, and I was still absolutely in the midst of treatment. So I'd had 8 rounds of chemo, I'd had surgery, and I was shortly due to begin radiotherapy. And then after that, I had various other treatments too. So I started my story without really knowing how it was going to end or what the theme of it would be. And this sort of became evident to me as I continued work on my book. So what I think my story is really all about is the importance of human connection. And it was, as I've just explained, finding that way of communicating to people, getting them to see my humanity, and also me trying to see theirs as well. And I think that's something we don't really talk enough about in medical care. So here's an illustration of that. So here's an appointment I had with the surgeon. So back at the breast clinic, and he's on his cloud like a god going, no metastasis, an area of enhanced cells, we need the bone scan. Do you want a mastectomy or breast conserving surgery? And I'm just there at the bottom, completely overwhelmed by this terrifying figure. And then I decide to be brave and ask actually what he's talking about. So I'm thinking, enhanced cells, should I know what that means? Will he think I'm stupid if I ask? Fuck it, what have I got to lose? What does enhance mean? Hang on. And there you can see he's getting off the cloud. So, and then he's coming down to my level and he explains what he's talking about. So he says, it means the cells are more active than usual. This may or may not mean an additional area of cancer. So there you are. He was on the cloud, but I don't think he realized he was on the cloud. I think medical professionals are so in their own world sometimes that they forget that this is all new to someone like me. And he was happy to come off it and come down to my level. Although I think it's interesting that I had to be the one to reach out there. And I think too often it is the patient who has to deal with that kind of thing. And that's not ideal, really. So I am really honest about how grim cancer is, and that obviously won't surprise you. It is a horrible experience. Chemo was unbelievably difficult. So I had 8 cycles of it. I lost a lot of hair. And some days it was just getting in the shower was just really, really difficult. So I think it's really important that I do illustrate just that side of things, just how horrible it was. However, as I said earlier, I want to do a lot more than that. So I want to firstly inject humour where I can. So one of the side effects I had was mouth pain. So my mouth basically felt like it was on fire a lot of the time. Many days I struggled to eat much at all. But then this made me think of, so I'll just read this out first. So it felt like my mouth was stuffed with cotton wool that had been doused in petrol and set alight. And there's me thinking, help. And I was thinking of that famous image of the oil fires in Kuwait, you know, the plumes of smoke across the desert. And I just thought, well, what if that was in my mouth? So then I put these two reporters in going, so what are we looking at, Brad? Well, Felicity, this takes me back to the Kuwait oil fires, but this time they're inside her mouth. So that's injecting a little bit of dark humour into what is otherwise just a relentlessly horrible situation. But no one wants to read a story about a relentlessly horrible situation. So I'm trying to bring in other elements of the story as well. So here is a panel from a page about the gifts that friends and family gave me. So best of all, my friends clubbed together to buy me a custom-made blanket, hand-woven from recycled saris. And there's me with my daughter. So the blanket says "fuck cancer" on it. And luckily she can't read yet because she's only 3. But I think some of my friends have described my style as quite cute, and I think that's right. So it's quite simple, clear lines, big eyes. So my people are quite cute and hopefully relatable. But I think it's quite an interesting juxtaposition to have that cute style. You can see my head is going bald, fuck cancer. It's like the light and the dark, and I'm trying to walk that line between being really brutally honest about the dark stuff, but telling a hopeful and human story with humour and sort of keeping that emotional truth throughout. So that's what I'm trying to do. And I think the other thing that the comics medium is just perfect for with my story is showing how my appearance changed over time. So I had long wavy hair before all this. I used the cold cap when I was going through chemo. So the cold cap is something you wear on top of your head. And the idea is it freezes your scalp, so less of the drug gets to the top of your head. So the idea is that it prevents complete hair loss. So I did keep quite a lot of my hair. I lost most of it towards the end, but then I got this lovely, attractive, like bald patch on top, which was just not much fun. So throughout my story, you see me at all these different stages, and then you see it growing back as well. And I think I really want my book to be something that people can read as they're going through treatment themselves. I want this book to be a friend to people who really need it, because I feel it's such an isolating experience. So this panel is from my experiences with radiotherapy. One thing cheered me up. At my first session, they took a photo of me. Whenever I glimpsed it on the monitor, it made me smile. I looked cheeky, happy, resilient. It was a version of me that I hadn't known was still possible. So I really wanted that message of hope to come through. So you see me going through all the horrible bits, but I really wanted it to have an optimistic outcome. And luckily so far, I am in a really good place in my life. So let's hope that continues. And then I started sharing panels on Instagram a year or so ago. And this was I really did this mainly to promote my work and get my name out there. But what I found over time, as I started posting more and more, is that I feel like it's become actually a support for other people going through cancer themselves. And I asked some of my followers if they give me some comments I could use in this talk. And so here's a few of them here. It's like your artwork is telling the story of my cancer life. Your art validates my feelings when I look back at my chemotherapy, radiotherapy. It means that I've buried some ghosts about my breast cancer. I feel understood. Your art uplifts me because you create human connections out of lonely experiences. Everything you have posted has resonated with me. And I get comments like this every single day. And I also get comments, actually, people asking, where can we buy your book, Hayley? And I have to say, well, I'm still looking for a publisher, so hang on, sorry. But I do have a cartography out with Colossive Press. So this is a small press in South London in Penge. I also live in Penge, coincidentally, and they invited me to do one. So this is sort of one-page zine with some bits down the sides, and it's called Hayley's Guide to Chemo. It's there's so much medical information out there. I don't need to provide medical information. What this really is a few observations, a bit of dark humour. Hopefully it's something that can be, people might give as a gift to their friends and loved ones. A few of my followers have actually bought this and donated it to the libraries at their cancer centres, which I think is really lovely. And then something else that happened was a few months ago, I was approached by an editor of a medical journal, and it's a medical journal all about radiotherapy, and she asked if I wanted to submit my radiotherapy pages to the journal as part of their patient experience section. I was delighted to be asked. So this was published, and here's an example of one panel here. So when you're in radiotherapy, at least for me, you get these four like heads circling around you, and it blows my mind that up till now, apparently, as far as I can tell, no one's given them silly names yet. So that was my job, to give them silly names, I've decided. And now they're in a medical journal. I think that's peer reviewed, so hopefully they'll be taken up internationally. That's my aim. So there's Leviathan, who rises up from beneath you. That's the one that actually zaps you with radiation. Mr. Nothing doesn't do anything as far as I can tell. Then Nerdy Robot and Sticky Back Plastic, something to do with cameras. I could find out what they actually do. I think it's funnier if I don't know, so that's fine. So this is one of their most read articles on their site now, which is really lovely. And I've actually had doctors contact me since it was published, including from the hospitals where I was treated, to say, this is fantastic, we'll take your feedback seriously. Because the other part of the radiotherapy pages is that I had a really awful time, and the systems were horrendous, and it was really upsetting. And so I've made that point very clear. And so it was really lovely to have messages from doctors say, we'll listen to you, Hayley. But I did feel really frustrated too, because I did try and feedback at the time, and clearly these messages weren't taken on board. But now with a comic, hopefully it will get through to more people who need to hear about it. And that's it. So thanks very much for listening. You can follow me on Instagram. If you don't want to have daily cancer content, I completely understand. But I hope you can see there I'm taking a slightly different approach to a really dark and scary subject. I've been trying to create the kind of work that I might have been drawn to before I was diagnosed. And a book that really sort of I was thinking about a lot was Nicholas Streeton's Billy, Me and You, because that is a book about child bereavement, and it's about trying to draw people into a really difficult subject that people don't talk enough about. So I was really thinking about that book when I was working on this. Thanks very much.
I'm Anna, and I'm a hold on, sorry. Let me just move this. Right, there we go. Yeah, as I said, I'm a cartoonist and illustrator based in Leeds. I don't really have a current book or a project to talk about, so I'm just gonna lead you through my journey with comics and where I am now in my career and my plans for the future. Right, so comics have been a part of my life since I could hold a pencil, really. From watching Batman '66 with my dad, to reading Calvin and Hobbes and Peanuts, to graduating as a fully fledged Wednesday warrior at Dave's Comics in Brighton, I've always consumed comics. And comics have always consumed me. So much so that I've always been compelled to make my own. Here are some early examples of my finest work. But I continued making comics in school, fueled even more by a comics club run by a small press creator, Dan Bell, which opened my mind to the concept of self-publishing, including my first visit to Thought Bubble at age 13. So picking every art and graphic design related subject in education naturally led me to the illustration course at Leeds Arts University. Not that Thought Bubble also being in Leeds had anything to do with my choice. Even though it was a very illustration industry focused course, I started to experiment and push my comic making abilities as much as I could. Here are some examples of the first comics I made at uni. Carbon County on the left is an ecological disaster story about renewable power in Wyoming, USA. and Strangers in Every Land is a comic adaptation of selected scenes from Cormac McCarthy's Suttree. Some of my comics were getting attention online, and after this project, Area 07, about my experience of visiting home after moving out for the first time, blew up on Twitter, I started to getting noticed by other creators and publishers. This led me to being picked as one of Broken Frontier's 6 to watch in 2019. I still kept on with experimenting with comics at uni, not only making them, but reading as much as I could from the local comic shops and our fantastic university library. I especially got into underground and alternative comics, which I eventually did my dissertation on. But then, halfway through my final year, the pandemic happened, which, like for everyone and everything, disrupted life completely. But maybe not in such a bad way for myself. I'd recklessly moved into this guy's house who I'd only been seeing for 3 months, which actually didn't turn out to be so reckless, as we've been together for over 4 years now. But I kept a daily lockdown comic diary as my final major project. This was partly due to my brain not being able to comprehend anything other than day-to-day living, but I was also really into autobio comics at the time, such as Dustin Harbin, Julie Doucette, Gabby Schultz, and Noah Van Sciver, so it all tied together nicely. I ended up documenting the first 3 months of lockdown. These comics will never be public, and even though we were in the midst of a terrifying pandemic, I do look back on them fondly. So I submitted my final uni work, and then it was straight on looking for real work. Luckily, within 3 weeks, I had an interview at the best comic shop in the world, OK Comics, and I got the job. But this job was much more than just a simple retail day job. It taught me how to talk to people about comics and how to pick the right comics for the right person. It taught me how the retail and distribution side of the comics industry works, and just how hard it is to run a successful independent bookshop. It taught me to read every type of comic, including the good, the bad, and the ugly. It connected me to our local comics community and emphasized the importance of social events and the power of inclusivity. But most of all, I got some of my best mates out of it. So, whilst working at OK Comics, selling and sorting hundreds of books each week, I was also dipping my toes into the professional publishing world of comics. My first pro gig was drawing a character created by Alan Moore and drawn by Steve Dillon, so there was no pressure there at all. It was Abelard Snaz for 2000 AD in November 2020. I subsequently drew a terror tale for them, and then later that year I drew a story for a graphic novel anthology published by Z2 Comics. Now, this was the first of many bad experiences working in the comics industry. In this particular case, I had to chase them for over 6 months to pay my invoice, and I never got any comp copies either. In October 2021, inspired by Inktober, I challenged myself to draw a diary comic every day for the month. I would get home from work and then draw into this sketchbook the highlights of the day. The recurring themes were my perilous bike commute to work, the internet going out at the shop, watching horror movies, playing Red Dead Redemption 2, me drawing comics, and general Halloween shenanigans. I posted these as swipe comics on Instagram, and due to the popularity and the enthusiasm I got from people reading them, I collected it into a self-published comic called Handlebar Gumbo. This was my first self-published comic, and the success of it really increased my confidence in championing my own work. I've always loved one-person anthologies, from 8 Ball to Dirty Plot, from Crickets to Blammo. The idea of a singular author-curated anthology really appealed to me, and I've always wanted to do my own. This spawned Peach Fuzz, my own one-woman anthology. Launched at Thought Bubble in November 2022, also my first year exhibiting. Its 36 pages contain 3 short story comics, Spring Awakening, Plumber, and That's the Way It Is, as well as smaller gags and back matter, but it was all written and drawn by myself. There was no plan or theme connecting these stories. but an underlying feeling of melancholy and murkiness in the everyday is present throughout, a theme that has unconsciously been observable in a lot of my work. This second foray into self-publishing was also a success and further boosted confidence in my own creations. And over the next year, I exhibited at comic fairs across the country, meeting amazing people and making not a lot of money, but it was all pretty fun. So at this point in time, I'd been steadily getting more work for hire comic gigs, which were getting harder to meet deadlines for, whilst also working my day job. I was then offered 2 big comic gigs. One, a 6-issue miniseries for a long-standing comics magazine, and the other, a full graphic novel for a new upcoming American publisher. I knew I couldn't complete these projects whilst also having my day job. So after signing contracts, I left OK Comics at the end of November 2022 and jumped straight into freelancing full-time, only for me to immediately dive headfirst into disappointment. The 6-issue miniseries was a bust, with the long-standing comics magazine going bankrupt and ghosting us, and my invoices, after I completed drawing the entire first issue. The other graphic novel project was then rescheduled for later on in the year due to scheduling issues. So 3 months into freelancing full-time, I had no work lined up and no money to show for it. Luckily, I had a fantastic comics writer looking out for me who had his own production company, so I had some scraps of work to get on by, as well as other random gigs showing up in my inbox. In my first year of being a full-time freelancer, I drew a video game comic, a werewolf comic, designed a beer label, drew animation assets, created storyboards for a children's 3D comics app, and drew multiple pin-ups and comic covers, just to name the variety of work I did to stay afloat. I also had more gigs with 2000 AD, such as Rank, a one-armed dwarf private detective sent in a fantasy world, which is the most enjoyable comics work I have yet to do. I find drawing comics for younger audiences very freeing, and it allows me to be more expressive and fun in my cartooning. But in September 2023, my rescheduled graphic novel gig was then also cancelled, as apparently me and the writer weren't big enough names in the comics industry for it to sell. And so once again, I was left with no work lined up. Fortunately, it was then soon announced that my entry for the Faber Observer Graphic Short Story Prize had won. So I had that going for me, which was nice. Dancing Queen is my most personal comic to date, and I was unsure whether to even submit it due to its darker tone, which didn't quite fit with other previous winning entries. But I did enter it, in part to all the support I had from my family and the Dancing Queen, Annie's family. In 2015, my best friend Annie died unexpectedly from an undiagnosed heart condition just 3 months shy of her 18th birthday. It obviously shook our entire world and completely changed my life. It took me a long time to get to grips with it, and her death still affects me to this day. I often think what she would be up to now, 9 years later, if she was still alive, and I had written down various thoughts and musings of what her life would be like. This prompted the narrative for what would become Dancing Queen. As everyone likes a bit of process, I thought I would quickly run you through how I made Dancing Queen. So I almost always start with a loose script of my comics. In this case, there was an initial version which was quite different to the final printed version. In version 1, the narrative was all based around Annie and all the endless possibilities of what her life could have been. However, I just soon discovered that, even though her life was cut tragically short, she had such a full and loving world, and the way she affected everyone's life in such a positive and happy way, it would have taken hundreds of graphic novels to actually capture what an incredible and unique person she was. It was an impossible challenge, especially since I only had 4 pages to do it in. So, like all good narcissistic cartoonists, I made it also about myself, and juxtaposing where I was in my life to my musings of where Annie would be, in contrast to the actual reality of the whole situation, all conveyed through surreal and ambiguous visuals. Comics have the charm and capacity to achieve something like this. A medium capable of braided narratives and enigmatic imagery that offers the endless possibilities of any story the author can think of and pen. To me, there is no other medium like it, which is why I love it so much. So, after figuring out all the script and visuals, I sketched everything out digitally in Clip Studio Paint using my Cintiq 13 HD. After a few more changes, I printed out the final pencils in blue onto A3 Bristol board and got to inking and hand lettering. So this is the final artwork for the last page, and definitely by far the most fun part is the final inking process for me. Then I scanned and cleaned up everything to print standard and sent it off, not really expecting much. Winning was a nice surprise and it was an overall good experience. I just wish they'd used a better interview headline. So where am I now, 1.5 years into being a full-time comics freelancer? Well, I have consistent work with 2000 AD, a fantastic supportive publisher that I love working for. I recently had the opportunity to draw and write an original comic for them, which I wrote with my boyfriend, and it will be coming out this Halloween. This was a nice change of pace from just being an art droid, and I hope it will be well received. However, due to me prioritising freelance work, I've not made any new self-published comics, and Peach Fuzz 2 is still unfinished. This has had me quite creatively depressed and is something I desperately want to change in the future. So, in the very soon future, I want to prioritise my own work. I am tired, broke and unhappy doing just work for hire gigs, so I might as well be tired, broke but happy making my own work. I want to do more short stories, mini comics and some more autobio inspired work, ideally having Peach Fuzz 2 and some other minis out for this year's Thought Bubble. I did apply for the Arts Council's Develop Your Creative Practice grant last autumn, and I got a lot of help with my application from the amazing Sarah Kenny, but I was ultimately unsuccessful, which sucks, but I'm planning on applying again. I want to give back more to the comics community. Even though it appears that I'm not that active on social media, I am very involved with my local comics community. Last year, from the success of OK Comics Drink and Draw events, spawned the creation of the Leeds Comics Collective, a monthly meetup for local creatives to chat comics and drink lots of beer. Lou can attest to that. I've also been more interested in comics education, and I've done a couple talks and workshops in local universities that I felt positive about, and I would be interested in doing more. And then long-term goals, well, it would be nice to have a short story collection published, and then maybe a graphic novel or two, but that's for future Anna to worry about. So yeah, that's the end of my talk. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you enjoyed my presentation.